Good morning, Land Skills Network. This is Ryan Fairbanks here with Jerris Johnson this morning. Jerris is going to share a message and presentation, and then I'll have some questions for him along the way probably. And after, spotlight's on Jerris this morning. So I want you to get to know him and what's going on with his career and life. So turn it over to you, Jerris.
All right, thank you. I've got different introduction pieces about myself that's built into the slides that I'm going to be sharing, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. All right, Ryan, can you confirm that you can see it?
I can.
Okay, perfect. So this is kind of an abbreviated version of a presentation that I shared a couple times last year. Once to the NALTA annual meeting conference, and the other one to the NADOA annual meeting and conference. I'm not going to take the same type of length or same type of detail as I did in those because I'm hoping for a little bit more interactive journey on this. But the whole purpose of this discussion is just to encourage people to think differently. Our land skills that we acquire over time, more than likely we learned those from a mentor or an environment that was learned from somebody else, There's a lot of tradition and culture that's within our industry, and there's a lot of those things that are good, but there's also a lot of those things that I think it's time to maybe take a step back and consider, are we doing things the best way in the most efficient way possible? And so that's what this is meant to be. It's meant to be a discussion that encourages some of those thoughts. I'm going to go through what these slides are, and I've invited Ryan that if he wants to interject at any time with any questions or additional thoughts on that, he's certainly welcome to. If we don't make it through all the slides that are there, that's totally fine. These materials will be available, and I'm always available for anyone who wants to message me or talk to me and talk about some more of these things. I'm always excited to do that. So here's my contact information that's on here. I am the principal, founder, sole person, whatever, of Launcher Energy Consulting. I've taken a bit of a backwards approach to the land business. In my late teenage years, early 20s, I was working actually oil field construction, very dirty, onerous work. And then went off to college at University of Oklahoma. I did the energy management degree. While I was in school, I did traditional courthouse and leasing work that was done for a couple of years. And then when I came out of school, I went in-house and I was in a E&P company landman role. And that lasted from about 2005 up to 2018, end of 2018. And I had different varying roles with various large E&P operators, went through landman levels, then went up to land manager responsibilities, had experience across the United States and a variety of different things.
Hey, Jerris, quick question there. Where was that initial experience doing courthouse work and getting into the land business?
Yeah, it was Oklahoma. So I was attending school at OU. Sidebar story, for my first year of college, I was actually living in Enid, Oklahoma, which is about 125 miles one way from Norman, where OU is located. I was married, and my father-in-law had a terrible accident, and my wife and I were taking care of him, and that required us to live in Enid. So I would drive 250 miles round trip a few days a week down to OU. And during that time, I began trying to figure out what type of internship I could do to get into the land business. And at that time, Continental Resources was still headquartered in Enid. And I landed a land internship with them for that summer. And then during that summer, we moved to Norman, and I sent out letters and resumes to every broker that was in the area, and one contacted me, and I was the first college student that they brought into their firm, and it led to many other college students that were going on and did title work through Southern Oklahoma and some leasing in Southern and Eastern Oklahoma.
So a game changer kind of from the get-go, getting to be the prototype student internship, huh?
Correct. Yep. Yep. At least for this particular organization. It's funny. Like I still meet people from time to time who will say that they work there. And I'm not saying that I was the genesis of their opportunity to be there, but to my knowledge, I was the first college student that they brought on, and it led to many, many more under that model.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So at the end of 2018, I was living in Birmingham, Alabama. I was working for Energen Resources, and we were acquired by Diamondback Energy. And at that point, as opposed to attempting to go back out into the sector to get another full-time job, I wanted to see what I could do independently, and experimented on a couple of different ideas and found that my heart was really into the service side. I feel like that there was a growing trend or a necessity that was going to be in place of companies wanting knowledge and background like what I had to be able to access on a contract or short-term basis. And so I set out to make that a business model. And that's had its ups and downs, but it's been pretty exciting over the last time. So that company is Lantra Energy Consulting. The logo's there in the corner. If you're curious, Lantra is the genus name of otter, which is my son's favorite animal. And this logo is a couple years old, but my teenage daughter actually designed that logo for me. So that's the family connection to that. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm not as active in recent couple past months as I had been before, but usually I'm on there several times a week, and always enjoy sharing content with folks and being involved with other people. You can look me up individually through my name, Jerris Johnson, or you can also look up Lantra. I'm still working on how to distinguish what the two things are. On my personal one, I tend to share personal anecdotes or some stories that are meaningful to me personally. On the company one, I tend to share some stories regarding the energy business in itself, and a few comments of insight that I might have there. But with this being a recorded session, as you're watching it, please go out there right now, connect with me, message me, let me know that you're watching this, and let's start a conversation and dialogue. I'm going to go through these things pretty briefly. I'm going to talk about some industry trends, some outsourcing opportunities that are out there, some of the technology that I see happening, and some remote working tips or thoughts along those lines, and then kind of some wrap-up summaries. So what I've noticed here, and this is what led me to begin thinking about things differently, is this is the oil price over the last 70 years and also the last 20 years. This is adjusted for inflation. Also, the gray bars that are there indicate recession periods. When I first gave a discussion that brought up these prices almost a year ago, that recession bar on the far right did not exist at that time. But as we know, the events of the last 12 months have put us into that situation. And so that's reflected there. You can see various spikes. You see the 2008, 2009 fall. You see the 2020 fall. You see a couple of others that you might recognize. One of the things that I began to notice is that our industry cycles a lot with its labor force in terms of what the oil price is. When oil price is high, people are hiring, companies are pretty stable. And then when oil price drops, then we see layoffs and we see people trying to find new opportunities. Anybody who goes into oil and gas should not be surprised by this. This is something we've been warned about for decades that this happens. One of the things I've noticed, though, is that these contractions, these rise and falls, those time periods is contracting. So whereas there used to be hiring modes that would happen for a couple years, and then people could be stable in their job for a number of years, perhaps even decades before seeing a drop off and a layoff. Those are now happening every couple of years. And we're seeing these layoff announcements happening pretty rapidly. And there's really no type of company that's safe anymore. I don't know that you can really anticipate going to a major company and believing that you're going to be there for decades and retire there and have total stability. It seems like everybody is subject to a potential labor change. So that's one of the things that I'm seeing is that companies are hiring and they're laying off. in much quicker periods. And so we got to begin to think, is that the best way for them to continue? Do we expect them to continue to do that, to where instead of it being years between those periods, it can become months between those periods? It's really costly to handle that with people. And so what might happen next? I think it's also interesting to see what's happening in our trade organizations. If you belong to any of these, I've had some experience at the leadership level in AAPL, and I've been able to be involved in some different conversations that are there and see some of the trends that's happening. About a year or so ago, membership in the AAPL was about 15,000 members. A few years ago, it spiked at around 18,000 members. I think today we're roughly at 12,000 members. And then not only is the membership dropping, but we're also seeing people do different things, looking outside of oil and gas, looking into other energy fields. I know that Philip Guerra participated in the land skills discussion a couple months ago. I've become acquainted with him over the last several months, and his story is very common to what many other people are looking for, is how do they use their skills and transition to other items. At least to the AAPL, the definition of energy work was formally changed about a year ago, to where now people who are engaged in those different renewable efforts or energy sources are welcome to work in other industries and maintain their AAPL membership and certification. I find that really exciting, because that means that the education and certification with AAPL is going to have to evolve as well. So I fully anticipate in the future we'll see educational offerings that are talking about solar and wind, and even things with the CPL pivoting towards that as well, to be able to create more rounded, well-versed landmen.
Yeah, Jairus, let me jump in
Yeah,
on that just for a
sure.
second. I have the privilege right now to be a member of the AAPL Education Committee that is putting together the educational lineup for annual convention. And you're correct. It absolutely is shifting to, there will be conversations, presenters who talk about renewables, more along the lines of things that have been expanded in the AAPL definition of land work. That is part of the offering that's planned for the upcoming convention this summer.
Yeah. So along those same lines, there's 3 total education committees within AAPL. Another one, which was newly formed last year, is the Education Development Committee. And last year was its first year. I was the chair of it last year. I'm the past chair this year for it. And that is the number one agenda item, is to be able to introduce renewable energy curriculum items to be able to be discussing and distributing through the AAPL. So members can look forward to hearing some discussions at the annual meeting in June, as well as continued curriculum moving beyond that. So it's exciting. So these couple statements here are pretty self-explanatory. The land grab that occurred in the late 2000s up until the mid 2000 teens. The industry decided that shale was here. It worked. It was blanket. And so then it was as many companies going out and acquiring as many different leases as possible. And so we had thousands and thousands of boots on the ground that were out attempting to acquire leases on behalf of companies. If you were a traditional brokerage company that did title and leasing, it was a really, really good time for you. But now essentially we've taken all the leases that there are to take. And so now there's some thoughts as to what we do. Now, not all of those leases were held. Not every single acre is leased. There are still opportunities that are there. But in terms of wild exploratory activities, like what we saw with the Marcellus Shale or with the Barnett, or with the Fayetteville, or some of these other blanket shale plays across the country, it's difficult to see when something like that may happen again. Not to say that it won't, but it probably won't happen in the near-term future. And so what do we do? Also, the mentality from the investment community has vastly changed for a number of years. The shareholders and the investors and the analysts were telling companies, we want you to go out and buy as much as you can, drill as much as you can, produce as much as you can. We don't care how much it costs. We'll get our returns later on. And we saw companies getting leveraged to massive scale in order to be able to buy the leases, drill the wells, and produce what the shareholder and investor and analyst expectations were. And then around the beginning of 2019, that investment community pivoted and said, okay, we think you've bought enough. Now it's time to make money. And so 2019 actually began a downturn that we began to see about the August, September timeframe of 2019. Some companies began having some stealth layoffs to where they were quietly letting go people, and they were doing it gradually to somewhat stay under the radar. This was all before the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic exacerbated things. But as we are moving back into a mode of oil prices going up, I don't know that there's a high expectation that we're going to return to the days that we were in before, of people drilling and producing and buying as much as they possibly can, no matter what the price is and no matter what the debt is. There's a pretty strong expectation that these companies be frugally and fiscally responsible, not just with the dollars that they spend, but also with the resources that they have. So this is a statement that I concocted, that so we're in the new normal, and how will land departments be differently? How's that going to affect us as land professionals? So what my belief is that as the oil and gas sector continues to recover, it's going to do so with fewer full-time staff than what it previously had. So the companies will still need critical matters and operations handled, but they will do so with a minimum workforce, and they'll supplement what they need with technology and contractors. So as noted, we've seen significant layoffs. We continue to see those even this week. I think that probably companies will be hesitant to go back and rehire all those people. I think they will probably see how they can function with minimal staff, and they will supplement with different software or technology or workflow efficiencies, and they'll be looking for people who are willing to apply their skill sets on a contract or consulting basis.
I would agree with that. That's what I'm seeing with my client, as well as with service operators, even drilling operators. Just how can we be efficient? How can we be productive and profitable with who we've got?
Yeah. And there's some pretty big advantage to being able to have kind of these plug and play resources that are available however, whenever you need it. People who are capable of doing a variety of different tasks that were previously done by folks who were full-time employed. And then there's a huge financial advantage in being able to do that. And companies are realizing this, and they're beginning to take advantage of it. But especially if you're a public company, there's massive scrutiny that is on that G&A budget line. So everything that hits your salaries, your compensation, your benefits, all those things are typically budgeted directly to the G&A line. And the analyst community and people who want to scrutinize the finances of a company, they want to know how much you're spending on these people resources, and is there any way to cut that back? So one of the things that is typically done, though, within an organization with their accounting is that if they've got a well or a prospect that they're specifically working on, and they bring in third-party people, usually you can bill those expenses directly to that prospect or to those wells. And then if you have a joint venture, whether it be through, an exploration agreement or a larger joint venture agreement, or even through a joint operating agreement, typically those agreements have provisions to where your partners are going to pay for those third-party costs. And so the attractive thing that becomes about here is that companies can utilize independent contractors, and they can get the same type of skill set and knowledge that they had from their full-time folks. But they're able to put those costs onto a budget item that is different than the G&A, and then potentially even bill that out to their partners, which I think becomes really attractive. Now, for the contractor standpoint, this becomes exciting because you have a chance to be able to work for a variety of different companies, potentially at once, or potentially, you're with one organization for a period of time and then with another one with another period of time. And you have an opportunity to really see and learn a lot much faster than you might in the traditional employment setup. And then people are beginning to value and they want to hold on to their freedom more than maybe what they had before. And so that type of arrangement also creates some opportunities to be able to do some other things to where maybe their 9-to-5 job or their company isn't the sole thing that dominates them. So what are the things that can be outsourced? Typically, when we think of land brokers, we think of title, leasing, curative, maybe some due diligence things. I would contend that if you have the right people, you can actually replace any and all up to all of the functions of a traditional land department. And so here's a list that I've generated here. Acquisition evaluations, anything in dealing with your agreements and the negotiation, the execution, developing your wells, putting together your units, anything that would be done from that company landman chair, that company land manager chair, could really be outsourced to competent individuals who are that plug and play resource that's available how and whenever you need them. There's some different strategical things on this list that I think are worth a longer discussion and worth considering that would help aid in us thinking about things differently. The NRI, for example, we take a fairly antiquated model and approach to the NRI that really doesn't make any sense to do it the way that we do it. And I think there's ways for companies to be able to gain greater returns by thinking differently about how that's done. But there's, in being able to secure data or being able to have different processes and things, workflows can be streamlined and there's a lot of potential for saving money. And again, as I said at the beginning, this is all about thinking differently. What should a land department look like going forward versus what it's been in the past? Here's a quick plug for a company that I do frequent business with. Launcher that's my own name. It's my own thing that I do stuff with, but really the heart of a lot of the day-to-day work that I'm able to do is through Paramount. And we've taken this whole area management process seriously and have begun offering all of these services out to clients. Any of the things that were on that list before, we've established methods and the right people in place and have the ability to be able to carry those out. So if anybody's interested in hearing more about that, I'm certainly happy to talk about it. The next mode is technology. That was another piece that I mentioned I think is going to be pretty key. These are some buzzwords, and I won't go into the full definition of what these are. But if you're not quite sure, if you hear these and you're curious as to what do these really mean, feel free to message me or talk to me and we can talk about what these different terms are and how they apply to not just oil and gas, but more specifically to land departments. A couple of the words that I'll mention are artificial intelligence and machine learning. There's some criticism that maybe we throw around the term artificial intelligence too loosely. So one of the things that I want to distinguish is that artificial intelligence, its true definition is really any type of machine or software efforts that's meant to alleviate brain power. So anything that we're doing to allow a computer to help us in our day-to-day work really falls under that broad definition of artificial intelligence. The scenario of the robot then becoming too smart and taking over the world, those within that science community usually refer to that as artificial superintelligence or artificial general intelligence. And that's where we begin to see some of those other scenarios. The debate question is, are we going to reach that superintelligence phase? There's some interesting things that people can point to and look to it that say that we're on the cusp of it. And there are literally billions of dollars being spent and invested, not by people trying to create it, but people trying to create it responsibly or set up barriers to keep it from taking us over. So some pretty smart people are are concerned that it's a viable threat and that we need to handle it with special gloves and give special attention to it. So that's an interesting discussion in a different debate. Machine learning is probably another term that you see a lot. This is the ability of software being able to learn repetitive tasks and to be able to repeat those tasks, or to be able to comb through large sums of data automatically and be able to recognize some trends. These are things that we would be able to do on our own over significant periods of time. And these machines are trained and they're able to read these models and do it much quicker than perhaps what we could. But these are becoming commonplace even within our day-to-day business, and is something to look out for. A couple of other things that are pretty fascinating along those lines. I noted the supercomputers. If you want to look up Total's Pangea 3, it's a supercomputer that they have. BP had some announcements a few years ago about some supercomputers. These are computers that are roughly the size of a football field. I mean, they're massive. They're doing massive computations. A few years ago, BP had some articles that came out about their Gulf of Mexico resources. Due to the computations that were done on it through these supercomputers, the machines found that there was about 1 billion more barrels of reserves than what the engineers had determined. So, by looking at the seismic and logs a different way and churning through that data, the computer determined that there were much higher reserves than what the people had calculated, which, is a huge return on that investment. For different land tools, there's tools for automated lease analysis where a computer can read the leases and tell you the key provisions from there. Text extraction, which is basically taking it's a step further than the optical character recognition, turning the lease, for example, into a digital format and then pulling out a particular language regarding certain provisions. Being able to identify what a particular oil and gas agreement is. And then the land software side is an interesting discussion as well. Historically speaking, land software has been part of large accounting softwares. And if it happened to have a land module tied to it, then the company was satisfied. But those land modules typically were not designed by land professionals. And so we're left with dealing with large clunky systems that don't necessarily aid in our day-to-day work, but they become a necessary evil for reporting and handling the different processes that we have to do. So you've got some entrepreneurial minds who are setting out to create some land software that works as a landman thinks. And so, I hope to see more of those that are happening. And then just kind of other tech possibilities are out there. You might see some stuff along these lines: blockchain, drafting, summaries, basically machines being able to read these documents and then, provide summaries of what they are, or more online or cloud collaboration that's happening there. This is something that I get really excited about. I read on this all the time and have some discussions along these lines with people. And so, if your mind is curious like mine, I'd love to have a talk about what that is. This is another tech company that I do some consulting work with. They're called Osberg, and they provide industry data intelligence predominantly right now in Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. There are plans to branch out into other states. They also provide digital courthouse records, as well as regulatory records. These are all included in the subscription. And they do a lot of this really high-level text extraction that I talked about on the last slide. They've generated some models that are able to read these different documents, identify them, and then pull out the critical data information pieces and put them into their software system. So if this name is not one that's very common for you and you'd like to learn more about it, let me know and I'll be happy to tell you more about how this program works.
How's that spelled, Jerris? Osberg.
OSE. Yeah, it's OSEBERG.
Thank you.
And their website is osberg.io.
Great.
Also wanted to share a couple comments about remote working. I mentioned before that I came to Birmingham, Alabama several years ago. I still live in Birmingham, and I stay heavily engaged in oil and gas, and even though there aren't any oil and gas companies here anymore, I still feel like I'm in the thick of the community. So, the remote working can be done. I first shared this thought about a year ago, and some of these ideas were pretty new, but I think a lot of people are pretty comfortable with a lot of these now. Communication tools that are available: Slack, Teams, Zoom, and Meet. There's ways to do online collaboration, and then video conferences, recording everything that we're doing right now. This is becoming commonplace, and it's possible to do. It's functional to do, and I think I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to be in front of people again. But I also hope that we're able to maintain some flexibility and working in places where we desire to live and desire to be, and be able to stay effectively engaged with our companies. So just some final thoughts here, prepared remarks anyways, is that the innovations are moving fast. And so how do we keep up? So my invitation is to think about some of the things that have been talked about today. And hopefully these will churn some ideas for you to be thinking about how maybe your job can be different, or how your career can be different. And if there's any way that I can help you with that, please let me know. But there's different efficiencies that are available that we can seek out. We can always do something better than what we've done it. And it's okay to challenge that and to ask, is this the best way that we can do it? I'm a big advocate of learning. Obviously, if you're watching and taking the time to listen to this, then you share that passion as well, and that's great. Communication is paramount in dealing with people internally and externally. I don't really think that you can over communicate. And then another statement that I have here is cultivating a culture that unites all land functions. This is something I've tried to preach for years. For some reason, we have a stigma in our industry, in our culture, that may put land administration people more superior to landmen, or landmen more superior to the land administration people, and one side works for the other, or however that is. And I really feel like that all those functions are critical. They all have important roles within the company. And so whenever possible, I advocate that those groups come together, they work unified, and they treat both with equal respect. And I also hope that the superiors in those companies and organizations recognize that as well. Finally, just kind of a statement that I go by and live by is that I gain my greatest sense of fulfillment by helping others achieve their goals and objectives. And so if there is a way that I can help you reach a goal that you're looking for, or way to be happier in the things that you're doing, please let me know. And I love doing that. I love offering favors and talking about different perspectives or insights on things. And the business is about building relationships and keeping those relationships. And so my salute to Ryan for coordinating this group and helping it grow and getting it together, because these types of relationships are what's going to be able to help us move forward with things and be able to get the best out of our careers. So with that, that's the conclusion of my prepared remarks. Ryan, if you've got any additional comments for me, great, or questions for me. If you want to go back to any of those slides, let me know. I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, I'll stop the sharing and we can converse for a couple minutes.
Okay, great presentation, great information. You're doing that. You're fulfilling and living exactly what your purpose statement there at the end says. You're helping me build and serve this community, to help land professionals network with each other. I think what you're doing is a good fit with my philosophy that there are basic skills that are essential as land professionals for us to develop. And if we have those basic skills in place, they may look different than they looked 10, 15, 50 years ago. But the philosophy, when, for example, I've got a guy in my Landman Mastermind group that is at the end of his career, just retiring. He's been in land for about 40 years. And it was typical when he got in and started in land work that you just learn it all. You learn title, you learn how to manage other people and projects, you learn how to negotiate leases and surface use agreements and right-of-way agreements. You learned it all, and you were expected to do it all. The first project that he went on, they gave him the project, and he saw it through from cursory, have there ever been any leases on this land, to running full title, acquiring the leases, paying the leases, bonuses, um, processing it through and preparing the abstract for the title attorney, and all the way through to production. And then from there on to several years later, the well being plugged and abandoned. In the last 15 years of my career in the land business, that kind of overarching skill set for an individual land professional seems to have become more and more rare. There's been the capacity in the surge that we've seen over the last 15, 20 years to specialize in a specific skill set and let people specialize in that area. And while that gained some efficiencies for the operators, not necessarily the best for the land professionals, and in the long run, not best for the operators, because as you've illustrated, Jerris, we're shifting back to, you need to be a Swiss Army knife kind of tool, where as a land professional, the various skills that are needed, and can pivot to apply those different skills at different points in time that are the most efficient and effective for your client or employer as an oil and gas operator.
Yeah, and I fully agree with everything that you're saying, and recognize that as well. One of the thoughts that if someone isn't exactly sure, well, what do I do in order to be able to get myself more well-rounded or gaining education or experience along those lines, I would say that pursuing and maintaining your certification with the AAPL is going to at least give you exposure to those different things. You cannot pass the CPL exam without having studied all aspects of land work. And you may not get that direct, application or immediate experience with it. But if you're able to carry that designation and people recognize that you're a CPL, then I think you're likely to have opportunities that could move you to some of these other opportunities within land work, because it demonstrates that you at least have an awareness and a basic knowledge or a thorough knowledge of what those different aspects are. And then to be able to maintain that designation, that certification, you have to engage in continuing education. And so I know that there's a lot of sentiment in the AAPL regarding the education, that we keep seeing the same things over and over again, and it's time for different material or more advanced material. And I can tell you that is being worked on. It's not easy to be able to do that in a quick scale with teams of volunteers, but there is that recognition that people want more advanced concepts or broader concepts. And there are efforts underway currently to be able to offer broader curriculums. But along those lines of how to become kind of a more well-rounded or broader based landman, that's one of the first things that comes to my mind.
Yeah, definitely in the works. One other question as we wrap up this, just for you, kind of to go back to your origin story of getting into land. What was it that, you talked a little bit about needing to have a career that was close to family as you were going to school, but had you had an interaction with a landman, or what really drew
Yeah.
you into the land business?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question as well. So I grew up in a very blue collar family. There wasn't anybody directly around me in my family that had attended college before, and so I didn't really know what type of professions or careers that were available. The only thing that I knew that people could do were the things that you see at your grade school career day. So I knew there were teachers and doctors and lawyers and businessmen, very generic terms. And I mean, quite honestly, there were many times in my life where I felt like that was all of that was pretty unattainable for me, because I just didn't know people who really did those things that were well connected to me or that were around me. As I was getting older, and my dad instilled some lessons into me early on that a college education was going to be pretty critical. I knew that I was going to do that, but I had no idea what I was going to study or what I planned to do after that. And I had a close friend and a family friend that we had, and his dad was a geologist. And it reached a point to where I needed to make a decision. I couldn't make a decision because I didn't know what my options were. And we were talking one day, and he said, "What are you going to go on to do?" And I said, "I have no idea." And he said, "Well, based on what I know about your personality and your aptitude, I think you could make a pretty good landman." And I don't know if he was joking or what, how he planted that seed, but I took it very seriously. He said OU has, from what I understand, they've got a good program on it. And so I looked into the energy management program at OU, made an appointment to meet with that department, and I began trying to connect myself to as many people as I could that were called landmen, and tried to learn about what their profession was. Truthfully, I was a year through my first year of college, and I was halfway through that first internship before I finally had an understanding as to what this really was. And thankfully, I really, really enjoyed it. It gelled perfectly with me, and it's been a huge blessing to myself and to my family over these years.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us. All right. Just to wrap up then, thanks Land Skills Network. Pleasure to put Jerris Johnson on the spotlight today and get to know him. And looks like some very valuable content that you've shared with us, information about how things are going and what the future might look like, things that we need to do to be prepared and ready to handle that. So great service to this community. Thank you, Jerris.
Yeah, thank you.